Hey guys, have you ever imagined that a city could hold the breath of the world for over 1,000 years? That behind its stone walls resides the destiny of a civilization that would change the course of time? Constantinople. A name once recited in prayers, surrounded by thousands of steps and contested by the trajectories of history. Today, we will take you on a journey through its final moments, gently, clearly, and with words that invite you not only to see history, but to feel it. If this kind of story moves you, if you like the way we whisper about the past, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, so you don't miss any of our future journeys. Share it with those who also love history and leave a comment below about which part of this story touched you the most, or simply write one word. I was here, and I listened. Welcome to a tale of siege, of resilience and fall, of the beginning of the end and the end of a world. Let's begin on a silent night, in the shadow of a newly invented cannon, and a young man who dreamed of conquering the city of the Caesars. Constantinople, a name that will vibrate gently in the mind of anyone who remembers the glories of the past. But the story is not an isolated story. It has roots way back, into ancient myths and shadows, to the beginnings of Rome itself. According to an old legend shrouded in the mists of time, the city of Rome was first founded by a pair of twin brothers, Romulus and Remus. Two names that live in mythological stories, said to have been raised by a she-wolf. Then they grew into two figures who determined the direction of world history. 753 BC. This is the date that historians believe is the beginning of Rome, a starting point on a long journey that would later give birth to the largest empire in the Western world. The Roman Empire began to spread its wings, step by step, city after city, region by region, until finally reaching the peak of its splendor during the reign of Emperor Trajan, exactly in 98 AD. At that point, Roman power stretched far and wide. Almost all of Europe was under its control. Even parts of Britain had become part of this vast empire. And if we look at an old world map, it will be seen that the entire Mediterranean Sea, the Mediterranean sparkling blue in the sun, was surrounded by lands that had bowed under the Roman flag. From the north coast of Africa, the dusty, desert-filled Levant, to hilly, rich Anatolia, all became part of the great body of the Roman Empire. However, too much greatness often brings its own burdens. In 285 AD, a wise but harsh ruler named Diocletian saw that this empire was too big, too heavy to carry on one hand, and in a monumental strategic decision, he decided to divide the empire into two parts, the Western Roman and the Eastern Roman. However, like water that has not yet completely separated from its estuary, for almost a full century afterward, this separation was not truly fully implemented, until, finally, the year 395 AD came, the year that marked the permanent separation of the two empires. Western Rome made Rome its seat of power, the place where it all began. Meanwhile, Eastern Rome, building its new center of glory in a magnificent city, a jewel between East and West, a city that would be known to the world by the glorious name of Constantinople. But history has not always been kind to these two hemispheres. Western Rome slowly began to show cracks. Fires in its power structure began to appear, and turmoil on the borderlands became increasingly difficult to control. In 476 AD, a great tragedy struck. Rome, the eternal city that had once been the heart of Western civilization, was invaded, was sacked, and overthrown by the northern tribes that the Romans had once called the barbarians. The Germanic tribes, moving mercilessly, brought the end of the glory of Western Rome. This event began a dark era in European history, a time known as the Dark Ages, a time when science faded, when culture and art were pushed aside by civilization, when power passed into the hands of small kingdoms vying for territory, without direction, without wisdom, without light. Western Europe, once standing majestically in the light of Rome, was plunged into the long, wild, and brutal mists of the Middle Ages. However, behind the collapse, a legacy remained, still burning. Eastern Rome, which now had a new identity as the Byzantine Empire. Unlike its fallen sibling, Byzantium grew into the last bastion of classical civilization. It maintained science, art, law, and organized military power. While the West sank into darkness, the East kept the torch of civilization burning. And on the wider world stage, Byzantium was not alone. To its east stood another great power, the Persian Empire, foe and ally in the ever-changing dynamics of history. These two superpowers stood face to face, coloring the East with war, treaties, greatness, and tragedy. And Constantinople, the jewel of Byzantium, continues to shine, a bridge between two worlds, East and West, ancient and modern, past and future. At that time, in the shadow of a turbulent era, a noble man was born, Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. He was born in the barren desert of the Hijaz region, a desolate region, but full of heavenly potential. And from the warm city of Mecca, from the gentle lips of a messenger, a voice emerged that would change the world. Islam spread slowly, but surely, becoming a new force that shook the Eastern world, its pure teachings, the monotheism, eradicating old beliefs. In Persia, which previously upheld Zoroastrianism, and in Egypt, the land of the pharaohs and paganism, Islam began to take root, changing beliefs, culture, and ways of life. Meanwhile, Anatolia, a vast region still part of the Byzantine Empire, remained a stronghold of Christianity until there came a resurgence. The Seljuk Turks, a new power from the Central Asian steppes, they managed to conquer most of Anatolia from the Byzantines. From around 1070 until the 20th century, in 1938 to be exact, Anatolia slowly changed its face. From a Byzantine Christian plain became a Muslim-majority region. But not all glory lasted long. The Seljuk Sultanate in Anatolia had to face a downturn. In 1246, the Sultanate fell. The previously unified Anatolia region split again into small, unstable kingdoms. But history was not over. The steppe winds blew strong again. In 1179, the Turks rose once again, making Anatolia the center of their domination. Kali, this through the Sultanate of Rome. But a greater storm was soon to come from the east, a man whose name would echo with fear and awe throughout the world, Genghis Khan. And behind him came the Mongols, a race of horsemen, long-haired, worshippers of the vast blue sky. They surged into the Islamic world. With irresistible force, they destroyed city after city and carved a trail of blood across ancient lands. In 1231, the Mongol Empire had conquered all of Persia. A great wave of people moved. The refugee movement was unstoppable. Toward one place that seemed like the last hope, Anatolia. In an instant, the region became a confluence of destinies, ethnicity after ethnicity, Greeks, Turks, Persians, Armenians, Afghans, Georgians, all mixed together in one land, without direction, without a leader, without a definite future. The situation in Anatolia became increasingly chaotic. And finally, in 1243, the Mongol Empire conquered the Sultanate of Rum. Once again, Anatolia shattered into pieces. Small kingdoms emerged, called beyliks, under the shadow of Mongol rule. The nomadic Turkic tribes spread. Some headed west, others were caught in conflict and civil war. Anatolia turned into a field of chaos. Looting was rampant. Uncertainty covered the sky. And, amidst the chaos, there remained one small tribe. Its voice was barely audible, the tribe of Osman. No one knew for sure where they came from. They came silently, like the wind, a cold but invisible night. Suddenly they appeared. Around 1280, among the Turkish travelers, living in simple tents, with campfires burning in the dark Anatolian night. However, history has its own way. They successfully tread a path untrodden by others. As Mongol power weakened, 1299, a figure from the Osman tribe named Osman Ghazi founded a new empire, the Ottoman Empire, or what the West knows as the Ottoman Empire. He started it all in Bilecik province, in the heart of Anatolia. And since then, he has been remembered as Sultan Osman III, the founder of one of the greatest empires ever known to mankind. The location of the empire he built was very close to Constantinople. That great city that had stood majestically as the center of Byzantium seemed like a magnet for souls yearning for revival. Then came the people, Turkish travelers, refugees, and frontier knights known as Ghazis. They came, bringing hope and swords, surrendering their fate to the banner of Osman. And here, the seeds of a great glory were planted. Among the ruins and debris, from the dust of history, a light was reborn. That would spread slowly, until one day, it would surround Constantinople and bring down its walls. The year 1302, on a lonely but fateful field, Osman the Firmsir, the founder of the Ottoman Empire, achieved his first victory against the Byzantine army. A victory which, though small on the grand map of history, but echoed Osman's name throughout Anatolia. This victory, like a flame fanned by the wind, his name soared, his light attracted many new followers, travelers, Ghazis, dreamers, even conquerors. One by one, Byzantine fortresses in Anatolia began to fall, as if the land had been waiting for the Ottoman banner. The year 1326 arrived, a year that brought sorrow and new milestones. Osman, I died, the founder passed away, but his legacy did not end there. He was succeeded by his son, a young man who inherited his fighting spirit, Orhan, and without wasting over time, Orhan continued his father's expedition. In the same year, the city of Bursa was conquered, and there, for the first time, the Ottoman Empire made a major city its imperial capital. 5 years passed. In 1331, Nicaea, the holy city that had been the center of Christian councils, suffered the same fate. It fell to the Ottomans. Then, 6 years later, in 1337, Nicomedia, the last Byzantine stronghold in northwestern Anatolia, finally surrendered. The Anatolian sky changed from a Byzantine sky to a completely Ottoman sky, but the story of conquest was not over. In 1354, for the first time in history, the Ottoman Empire crossed the Sea of Marmara. They didn't just step, they crossed the border continent, and from beneath the gentle lapping waves the Ottoman army captured Gallipoli. That was their first step on the European mainland. Under the command of Suleiman Pasha, Orhan's son, the Ottomans were now not only an Asian power, but also a new force setting foot in Europe. From that point, their territory continued to expand, year after year, fortress after fortress. And as time marched on until 1432, the Ottomans had penetrated far into Eastern Europe. They had taken control of most of Serbia, and even part of Hungary was under the shadow of the crescent moon banner. In the same year, the Ottoman Empire was led by Sultan Mehmed II, a young ruler, just 28 years old. At that time, he was waiting in the palace of Edirne, a city that was the jewel of his empire's borders. He was restless. His mind was troubled as if someone was about to be born, but it hadn't shown itself yet. Then he took the holy mushaf, reading verses from the Quran softly to calm his heart and soul. Not long afterward, a palace official approached, bringing news about the birth of a baby boy. Sultan Mehmed II smiled, and he named the baby with the majestic name, Mehmed, a Turkish form of the name Muhammad. However, Mehmed was not Murad's only child. He had two older half-brothers, Ahmed and Ali, and he wasn't the Sultan's favorite either. In general, Mehmed had almost no chance of inheriting the throne. But as history always holds secrets, fate had other plans. His two half-brothers died before they could reach adulthood. And of all the possibilities that had faded, Mehmed remained, as the sole successor, one son, who would one day hold the fate of a great empire and carve his name in history as the conqueror of the eternal city. But then he was still a baby. As the sole heir to the throne, Sultan Mehmed II did not want to leave the future of the empire in empty hands. He knew that Mehmed, his only remaining son, would one day bear the burden of history. So he took it seriously. He placed the child in the palace of Edirne, a magnificent city of palaces, where the cold stones held the sound of imperial footsteps. There, little Mehmed lived, surrounded by nannies, teachers, and guards, under the direct supervision of the Sultan himself. But unfortunately, that hope did not immediately grow beautifully. Little Mehmed was not an easy child. He was stubborn, easily offended. He did not hesitate to rebel against his teacher, and almost refused to touch the Quran at all. Sultan Mehmed. At first he was patient, but when the rebellion repeated, he finally gave permission for the teacher to hit him Mehmed if he remains defiant. With stick in hand, the teacher came before the prince. He said softly but firmly, "My Lord Father sent me to teach you and told me to hit you if you don't obey." Mehmed laughed, a trivial laugh as if challenging all authority. But that very second the teacher began to hit, and there, that defiance was broken. There was no shouting, there was no reply, there was only change. Mehmed began to obey. He began to open the holy book page by page, reading verse by verse with reverence. Then slowly, he explored other horizons of knowledge. From the Quran, he crossed over to history. From Turkish, he mastered Arabic, Persian, and Greek. He understood geography, delved into science, and loved literature. What initially seemed like a naughty child grew into a special person, a sharp, strong-willed person, and no longer just an heir, but a true future leader. And in 1444, Sultan Murad II, who has long wanted to stay away from worldly affairs, decided to focus on worship and spiritual life. He handed over the throne to Mehmed, who at that time was only 12 years old, and at that very young age, Mehmed officially becomes Sultan Mehmed II. However, 2 years after he took office, a big wave of trouble arose. Janissary army, the elite troops of the Ottoman Empire, rocking the palace with rebellion. Janissaries who should be the protector of the throne, demanding power and showing his fangs. Mehmed, still too young, too green in government affairs. He also called his father back, and Sultan Murad II returned to the throne, leading back the Sultanate, put down the rebellion with full force. He ruled until the end of his life, and when he died, in 1451, Mehmed II, now it's not, he was a child again. He had become a 19-year-old young man, and now he became Sultan for the second time. But this time the throne was his all. At the beginning of his reign, he was immediately confronted with a rebellion in western Anatolia, a movement that strongly indicated Byzantine support. But Sultan Mehmed acted quickly. He crushed the rebellion with a decisiveness that marked his new character. Shortly afterward, unrest arose again. This time it came from the Janissaries, who again demanded a wage increase. And cleverly, Mehmed complied with their demands, but secretly he planned a strategic move. He overhauled the structure of the elite army, eliminating the dominance of the old groups and replacing them with men loyal only to him. Now Mehmed stood as a young sultan who was not only intelligent, but also brave and strategizing. Meanwhile, outside the walls of its palace, Constantinople, the eternal city, once majestic and impregnable, now nearly dying. It had long been in gradual decline, the legacy of past disasters. Between 1309 and 1404, chaos, betrayal, and unrest had eaten away at its body. And in 1347, a most deadly guest arrived, the Black Death. It swept across the world. And in the darkness of sobbing nights, the plague claimed no less than 200 million lives. Constantinople was not spared either. It became a city nearly bankrupt, fragile from within, and almost defenseless. But in the distance, there was a young man staring its walls, a young sultan who has long harbored a big dream, and history is only a matter of time. And now, the shadow of destruction began to envelop the ancient walls of Constantinople, a city that once shone brightly like the morning sun, now slowly dimmed, shaken by time, open to its approaching fate. Constantinople, the city that once symbolized the splendor of the Eastern Roman Empire, now became the first European city touched by the terrible plague. The Black Death. The Black Plague spread like a cursed fog, entering the city's alleys, sweeping away house after house. The population plummeted drastically. No more than 100,000 people remained in the city. As if that weren't enough, a series of earthquakes rocked the holy city, shaking its foundations, collapsing its walls, even toppling the dome of the Hagia Sophia. In 1346, Constantinople's condition at that time, that it was truly a matter of concern, and the city's wounds were further aggravated by internal court feuds who fought for the throne like wolves for meat. At the coronation of Emperor John IV Cantacuzene in 1347, people came to witness, but what they saw was not splendor, but a crown made of glass. And when the banquet was held, the food was served in clay cups, the trays were made of pewter, all the gold utensils had been sold to finance the civil war, the jewels were pawned to Venetian merchants. Things looked bleak. The glorious reputation of the Eastern Roman Empire, slowly eroded by suffering and greed. Meanwhile, on the other hand, the Ottoman Empire was growing and flourishing. Its economy was strengthening, its territory was expanding, and its power was beginning to rival that of any other in the world. Surrounding areas. And amidst this decline, Emperor Constantine XI sent a letter to Edirne, to Sultan Mehmed II. The letter contained tons of complaints, requests, and subtle threats. The emperor stated that he could no longer afford to pay the annual tribute of 300,000 aspers. The tribute had previously been paid to restrain Prince Orkan, who was now elderly, but still considered a threat by the Ottoman Empire. Orkan, also known as Orkan Çelebi, was the grandson of Süleyman Çelebi, one of the 4 Ottoman sultans who fought each other in the civil war between 1402–1413. He was also a cousin of Sultan Mehmed II, and since then, Prince Orkan had been held as an honorary prisoner in Constantinople. The Ottomans even paid tribute to keep him there, away from the center of power, so that became a trigger for chaos. But now, due to the economic crisis, the emperor offered the Sultan 2 choices: double the tribute, or we release Orkan. A subtle threat, but its meaning was very clear, because releasing Orkan means threatening the Sultanate with the danger of civil war, reviving old wounds. But Sultan Mehmed II wasn't surprised in the slightest. He was already familiar with the old Byzantine tactics, stoking internal conflict, turning one against the other from behind the sacred walls. He knew that Orkan was just a trump card, now played by Constantine as a last resort, but Sultan Mehmed was no longer a child. He wouldn't be intimidated. Instead, he replied calmly but coldly, and then he demanded that the annual Ottoman tribute to Byzantium be stopped completely. For Mehmed, there was no longer any point in maintaining a sham agreement with a dying empire. Then he took a shocking strategic step. He built a massive fortress directly opposite Constantinople, on the European side of the Bosporus Strait. The fortress was named Rumeli Hisarü. A mighty fortress, towering above the ocean currents, was built within Byzantine territory itself. The fortress was not only a symbol of power, it also served as a tax collection post for all ships passing through the trade route to Constantinople. Now, the city was strangled from the sea, the Black Sea was closed, trade was strangled, and the threat came from right across. Emperor Constantine XI sent an envoy with a final warning. The letter was filled with emotion, full of resignation, but also the last remaining pride. Because because you have chosen war over peace, and I can no longer bring you to peace, neither by pleas nor by sacred oaths. Therefore follow your will. I seek refuge in God. If he has decreed that this city will fall into your hands, then who can prevent it? But if he desires peace, then I will welcome it. But for now, since you have broken the peace treaty, then I consider it cancelled. I will close the gates of this city. I will fight for my people, and you use your strength until the true judge decides justice for us. A majestic answer, however. Sultan Mehmed replied with one short but powerful sentence: surrender the city, or prepare for war. And with that, the final curtain began to rise. Constantine, realizing that there was no room for negotiation, he began preparing the holy city's final defense. As the inevitable war approached, the emperor sent envoys to all the Christian rulers of Western Europe, begging for help. He wrote to Pope Nicholas in Rome, who responded with a strategy. He began to persuade the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick III to launch a crusade. One last attempt to save the city once called New Rome. But night was falling. The walls of Constantinople now waited. It was no longer a question of who would come to help, but when history would knock. And the sky began to darken, the boundary between day and night blurred, like the fate of a city about to be rewritten by history. Constantinople, for centuries the last bastion of Eastern Christianity, now awaited its fate at the mercy of sword and gunpowder. In October 1452, unsettled winds began to blow from Edirne. Sultan Mehmed II, who had been observing every maneuver of Emperor Constantine XI, did not remain silent. He learned of the plans of the emperor's two brothers, Demetrios and Thomas Palaiologos, who were trying to reach the Peloponnese, appealing to the Christian powers in the West for help. Therefore, the Sultan sent his troops, led by the commander Turahan Bey, to intercept and attack them. Meanwhile, at sea, the merchant ships that were Constantinople's lifeline began to be disturbed by the forces Ottoman. The food supply that originally came through the Black Sea slowly began to stop. The empire began to starve from within, and the external threat became more real. A Venetian sailor named Antonio Rizzo once tried his luck. He wanted to pass through Rumeli Hizara without paying taxes, tax-free, taking advantage of the strong currents of the Bosporus Strait, and hoped that luck would be on his side. But no, the Ottoman guard cannons detected him, and in an instant his ship was hit, destroyed, and sank. The sky above the city grew heavier. Then came Orban, a Hungarian cannon expert. He arrived in Constantinople and offered his services to build a large cannon to defend the city from the Ottoman threat. However, he demanded a high price, and unfortunately the emperor couldn't afford it. Nevertheless, the emperor still asked him to stay in the city, in the hope of one day, when the money was available, the cannon could be built. But time passed, and the promise was never kept. Orban became disappointed and left the city. He crossed to the other side, to Edirne. And when he arrived there and expressed his idea to Sultan Mehmed II, the Sultan was immediately interested, because indeed he had long had a grand plan in his mind to conquer Constantinople. He paid Orban not just the agreed amount, but 4 times that, and in just 3 months a weapon the likes of which the world had never seen before was born. A giant cannon. They named it the Basilica Cannon. On Friday, March 23, 1453, Sultan Mehmed II set out from Edirne, bringing his entire army. Step by step, banner after banner, and when they arrived before the walls of Constantinople in early April, it happened to be Easter Sunday. Inside the city, churches were filled with worshippers, praying fervently, asking for safety and protection. But one church remained silent, Hagia Sophia. It had now been transformed, become a Latin church, after being taken over by the Pope. The majority of Constantinople's inhabitants, who were Orthodox Christians, no longer went there, because they no longer saw it as a house of prayer. Meanwhile, preparations for the siege proceeded swiftly. The ground was dug, cannon positions were prepared, and troop formations were drawn up. As was the tradition for sieges, Sultan Mehmed II first sent a message to Emperor Constantine, demanding the city's peaceful surrender. But the offer was flatly rejected. Of all the emperor's diplomatic efforts to solicit aid from the Christian kingdoms of the West, only one arrived, a Genoese knight named Giovanni Giustiniani. He brought 1,000 troops, not in the name of the kingdom or the church, but on his own initiative and at his own expense. The emperor then appointed him commander-in-chief of the defenses responsible for guarding the western walls. And to protect the city from the sea, the emperor ordered a giant chain to be erected stretching 1/2 kilometer between Constantinople and Galata. The coast was now heavily guarded by Venetian ships, preventing Ottoman ships from entering the Golden Horn. And now all was ready. Under the crescent moon banner, the Ottomans arrived with 100,000 troops, among them 8,000 Janissaries, 10,000 regular troops, and the rest are irregular troops and cavalry. They also carried 69 cannon, 1 basilica cannon, 1 medium cannon, and 67 standard cannons. From the sea, 126 small Ottoman ships were ready to besiege from the water. Meanwhile, on the Byzantine side, they only had 8,000 regular troops, including 500 followers of Orban, 15 cannons, and around 30,000 volunteers who, unfortunately, had no military experience. They brought only shields, swords, and armor, but no strategy, nor adequate weaponry. In the cold, late morning, the sky over Constantinople began to change color, not because of the light of dawn, but because of the shadows of cannons aimed straight at the heart of the city. And history prepared to record the final moments of the ancient city. And so it was, like a wave that washes ashore with full intention, yet unhurried, the historical steps of the Ottoman Empire drew closer to the gates of destiny. Meanwhile, at sea, Emperor Constantine clung to his last hope. He had only 26 ships, most of them giant ships belonging to the allies of Genoa and Venice, carracks, formidable but not numerous enough to face Sultan Mehmed's naval forces snaking from afar. In this clearly unequal comparison of forces, open warfare was not an option for Emperor Constantine. He could not gamble in the midst of the dark ocean, so the only thing he could rely on was the strength of Constantinople's walls, walls that for centuries had silently witnessed the collapse of ambitions and the burial of dreams of conquerors. And indeed, this was not the first time Islamic forces had tried to conquer the Holy City. 7 previous attempts had been made, 4 by the Umayyad dynasty and 3 by Mehmed's steadfast predecessors. Yet the city, with its towering triple-layered walls, held firm, as if never tiring of breaking their hopes. The thickness and strength of those layers made Constantinople seem like it was made of heavenly stones, planted with hope, fortified by the prayers of priests who constantly murmured verses of salvation. Another method, digging an underground tunnel through the city, was also tried, but it didn't escape the eyes of the city guards. With a simple tool, a water jug placed on the ground, they could detect the vibrations of the excavation. And when suspicion became certain, they dug a rival pit, doused it with oil, and lit a fire, making it a fiery grave for the diggers. The only way left was to demolish the walls, and that was the choice Sultan Mehmed chose decisively, without a moment's hesitation. Now he stood, the young sultan, young in blood, old in determination. He stood before the city that had long been the dream of conquerors, which in a great hadith the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had promised would fall into the hands of the best king and the best army. And that day, April 6th, 1453, for the 8th time, the Muslim army tried its luck again. The first cannon fired into the still, chill morning sky, a roar like thunder awakening from a long sleep, but it was only a small cannon. Some of the heavier artillery was still on its way. The impact was negligible, and the walls of Constantinople remained proud. Overwhelmed by enthusiasm, some of the irregular troops attacked early. They chose a section of the wall that seemed weak, but unfortunately, they did not yet know that within every crack in the wall lurked experience, and behind every crack lay a ready army. Giustiniani, the Genoese knight, and his troops broke out of defense and counterattacked. The counterattack forced the Ottoman army to retreat, a harsh lesson in a war that had not yet truly begun. Sultan Mehmed held his breath, suppressing his anger. He decided to wait, to allow all his artillery to arrive before launching his next attack. In the meantime, he used this lull to level the terrain. The moats surrounding the city walls, which in its peace might have once been a conduit for water and life, were now filled with wood, stone, and earth. This effort was not without its victims. Many lives were lost, struck by the hail of arrows from the walls, arrows sharp not only because of their sharp points, but also because of the prayers and hopes invested in each pull. And the face of war slowly changed, from the clink of weapons to the whisper of sweat, from the whirring of arrows to the faint screams of the fallen. Night fell, bringing a faint mist, but the spirit among Mehmed's ranks burned like a flame that refused to be extinguished. And that morning, which seemed unwilling to promise peace, was once again filled with the roar of steel and the billowing smoke of gunpowder. On April 12, 1453, all the artillery had arrived. Cannons, large, medium, and small, were now neatly arrayed along the 4-mile front line. The rows of steel stood like a giant column whispering doom, silent but menacing. And from there, the greatest cannonade ever seen in the history of warfare at that time erupted. The echo of the first explosion sounded like a small apocalypse thundering through the sky and shaking the hearts of all who heard it. The vibrations traveled far and wide, to the hulls of ships moored in the waters of the Golden Horn, The waves bounced off the water, off the walls, and in the hearts of the people who were beginning to realize their days of peace would never return. Shot after shot, followed by balls of fire hurled from the catapults. A flash of fire shot up, slicing through the previously silent night sky, and a plume of smoke rose into the air, rising slowly like incense from an ancient altar. Only this was incense from war, not sacrifice. But the city's defenses did not remain silent. Attacks were countered, the walls repaired, and their faith remained unwavering. Day turned to night, night to day, and a barrage of explosions filled the Constantinople sky without pause. 6 days passed in flames and embers, but slowly, a bitter realization dawned. The rate of fire from the Ottoman cannons was not enough to breach the walls that the city's workers were constantly repairing. Each blast that shattered stone was immediately followed by hands patching it back up. The cannon barrels, after firing their giant shells, had to cool for hours before they were ready to fire again. Even the basilic cannon, the super cannon that was the pride of the army, could fire only 7 shells a day, no more. But time is a double-edged sword. It wasn't just the enemy who bore the wounds. Cracks began to appear in the cannons. The overheated barrels showed the fine lines of metal death. Orban, the creator of the giant cannons, could no longer hide his worry. He knew, in the silence of the night when all the explosions had subsided, that his grand dreams were beginning to be shattered by harsh reality. 40 days had passed, and the walls of Constantinople, they remained standing. Like a mountain braving a storm they stood, unshaken, undaunted. The Ottoman army's morale began to wane. Exhaustion, doubt, and despair gnawed at their resolve. The only hope now lay in increasing the intensity of their fire, so that the walls would collapse faster than they could repair them. But forcing the already exhausted cannons to fire would only destroy them, and that was no cheap gamble. So the other option was to divert the enemy's focus, to divert their defenses elsewhere, to the waters of the Golden Horn. But the sea remained closed by a giant chain that stretched between the 2 continents, an iron chain that locked out hope. And though 40 days had passed, Sultan Mehmed's ships had still not penetrated it. Finally, the young sultan, now burning with passion and undying hope, decided to take a risk that could change everything, or destroy everything. He forced Orban to fire the enormous basilic cannon again, even though its barrel was not yet cool enough. 10. Orban, knowing the enormous risks involved, initially refused. But an inventor could not deceive the curiosity and courage of a sultan who had sacrificed everything for a city. So he nodded in resignation and in a low voice asked everyone to leave. He knew what might happen. He knew this could be the end, not just for the cannon, but for him. Then the fire was lit. The gunpowder ignited, and in an instant, a tremendous explosion shook the earth, not from the bullet, but from within the cannon itself. The basilic cannon exploded, cracking, shattering, and shattering into pieces. Chunks of metal flew like celestial knives, and the giant fragments killed many who stood too close, including Orban, the inventor, who dreamed of destroying a great city with his creation, was now a victim of his own ambition. And night fell once more, bringing with it a shadow of growing tension over the ground already saturated with embers and blood. On the night of April 18th, 1453, a cold wind swept gently, as if conveying a whisper of the great decision the young sultan had just made. Sultan Mehmed, after long days of cannon fire and failed attempts to breach the mighty walls, now looked at the city walls with different eyes. He judged that enough was enough. Enough of the walls being battered by iron and fire. Now was the time to send men, flesh, blood, and determination to test Constantinople's true strength. So that night, the sky witnessed as the infantry, archers, musketeers, and loyal guards marched toward the walls. They stepped over the filled-in moat and carried long ladders, leading up to the towering, seemingly untouchable stone walls. Melee combat broke out, no longer between metal and wall, but between man and man, between life and death. The slashing, pushing, and striking took place in the darkness, illuminated by the flames and the cries of battle. Blood dripped between the stone and the earth, and time seemed to stand still for the 4 hours the battle lasted. But the wall still wouldn't give in. Giustiniani and his chosen soldiers held their ground like a living wall, blocking every step of the Ottoman army. So as dawn began to cast an orange glow on the horizon, the Sultan's troops retreated to their tents, carrying with them wounds and deepening frustration. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ocean, where the iron chain still blocked the waters of the Golden Horn, the Ottoman navy was also fighting hard. But their ships, smaller and lighter, were no match for the superiority of the larger Coast Guard fleet. Fireballs were launched from the enemy ships and fell onto the decks of the Sultan's ships, crushing their hopes. Even there, retreat became the only option. In a seemingly deadlocked situation, with land and sea refusing and heaven unanswered, Sultan Mehmed did something even his advisors considered nearly impossible. On the evening of April 21st, as the sun slowly sank behind the horizon of the Bosporus, the Sultan ordered something that would be remembered throughout history. He opened a path from the Bosporus straight up Galata Hill, and then down it to the waters of the Golden Horn. The path was no ordinary path. It was a wooden ramp, oiled for slipperiness, down a steep slope 60 meters high at an 8-degree angle for 2 kilometers. Along this wooden ramp, one by one, the Ottoman ships were moved, not by sea but by land. And overnight, like a miracle written on the pages of fate, 72 ships were pulled from the strait, over the steep hills, and onto the other side, straight into the waters of the Golden Horn, where no Ottoman ship had previously been able to reach. The next morning, as dawn lifted the mist and the first light washed over the city walls, the people of Constantinople were shocked. They found that Sultan Mehmed's ships were now behind their walls in the Golden Horn, a territory they had considered safe, untouched. It was a sight that shattered hope and faith. One thing piqued the curiosity of many. How could the Ottoman ships have passed Galata Hill without a single word reaching Constantinople? The hill was so close to the walls of Galata, a Genoese trading colony, which had officially declared neutrality in the conflict. The Genoese, Christian sailors and merchants from Italy, did indeed have trade interests with both sides, the Ottomans and the Eastern Roman Empire, and although they swore neutrality, many of them, including Giustiniani, who led Constantinople's main defenses, were Genoese. But by daybreak, no word had reached the city of what was happening on the other side of the hill. Were they truly unaware, or had they chosen to remain silent to protect their neutrality and their business? What is clear, as the sun rose fully in the sky, the citizens of Galata, the citizens of Constantinople, and even their bravest defenders witnessed something they had never imagined. Victory was advancing in an unusual way, not from the front, but from the top of the hill. And the sea breeze blew again, bringing with it the shadows of exhaustion and lingering booms. Although the Golden Horn had now been crossed and the Ottoman ships had anchored in the calm waters, the siege was not over, and the fortress had not yet fallen to the ground. The breach of the Golden Horn's defenses was not the end, but rather a new chapter in a tense game of fate. Inside the city, Emperor Constantine and his Venetian allies immediately held an emergency meeting. That night, under lantern light and nervous voices echoing off the stone walls, they discussed how to hold back the waves now coming from both sides. Two options were proposed. First, attack by land to destroy the Ottoman cannons now positioned on the shores of the Golden Horn. Second, attack directly by sea, in a stealthy operation fraught with daring and risk. The debate was heated, arguments clashing like waves against rocks. Finally, a vote was taken, and the majority voted for the second option, to attack by sea, stealthily, in the pre-dawn darkness. Some Genoese sailors from Galata got involved, and so, that night, neutrality was violated. Toward dawn on April 28th, while the sky was still dark and lit only by reluctant stars, the Italian ships slowly emerged from behind Galata's sea walls. They moved silently, like shadows of the night seeking to cut off the light of Ottoman hope. But the ships did not completely escape notice. The first fireballs were fired, igniting one of the Ottoman ships. The sound of a small explosion and the rising flames marked the breaking of the pre-dawn silence, but the silence was soon replaced by a symphony of war. Cannonballs from the Ottoman ships rang out, bouncing off the water and sky. The loud sound echoed through the city walls, shaking the hearts of all who heard it, and over the narrow, winding waters of the Golden Horn, battle erupted. A close-quarters naval battle in such a small space was a living nightmare. The sea was filled with flying fireballs, arrows, and the sound of clashing metal. The sky changed color, not because of the sun, but because of the flames and the rising smoke. For an hour and a half, both sides fought with all their might. But ultimately, the superior position and the fierce spirit of the Ottoman forces led to victory. 2 Italian ships were sunk. 1 was badly damaged. 90 sailors perished. Meanwhile, on the Ottoman side, 1 ship sank with all its soldiers on board. But despite the losses, Sultan Mehmed's warriors' morale soared. They celebrated this small victory with great fanfare, a victory over a nation long known as the rulers of the seas. And now, the naval power of Venice and Genoa was beginning to crack at the hands of a young force from the east. Meanwhile, on the other side, on the land walls which were constantly rocked by cannons, the sounds of victory were also beginning to be heard. The massive stones from Sultan Mehmed's cannons were no longer blocked as easily as before. Constantine's troops, who usually repaired the damage to the walls quickly, were now dwindling. Many of them had to be diverted to guard the now exposed side of the Golden Horn. That was what Sultan Mehmed had hoped, that every attack would throw his opponent off balance, but Emperor Constantine was not giving up. He launched a counterattack. To avenge his defeat at the Golden Horn, he placed 2 of his cannons near the Golden Horn sluice gates. On May 3rd, the cannons fired. A mighty boom shook the water and sky, striking the Ottoman ships anchored on the other side. Some ships were instantly destroyed and sank. The sea met the crumbling wood and iron with a final chime, like the bells of an unfinished prayer. And night fell, bringing heavy clouds and winds filled with the sound of cannons and the gasps of soldiers who had not yet slept. The battle was no longer simply a clash of arms. It had become a duel of endurance between 2 worlds, one that sought to defend and one that vowed to conquer. After Emperor Constantine's cannon attacks on the shores of the Golden Horn sank several Ottoman ships, Sultan Mehmed responded immediately. He moved his ships out of cannon range like chess pieces carefully moved into new positions, and then retaliated. The Ottoman cannons roared again, shaking land and water in a firefight that lasted for 2 days. On May 5th, the booms continued, but the result? A draw. No one truly won. Only the sky bore silent witness to the clash of 2 steely wills. However, on that day, Sultan Mehmed demonstrated that strength lies not only in the edge of the sword, but also in the mind. He made a daring maneuver. Massive cannons were moved to the top of Galata Hill and firing giant stones across rooftops toward the Venetian ships stationed at the Golden Horn docks. Some of the stones hit their targets, but many missed and fell on Galata's residential areas, even destroying Genoese merchant ships that were not taking part in the battle. A chorus of protest arose from the Galatan population. Sultan Mehmed, knowing he needed their neutrality to remain, responded with a gentle but firm promise. He would replace all the damage after the city was conquered. And the cannonade continued. By May 14th, 212 stones, each weighing nearly 90 kilograms, had been hurled from the hill. Their sound was not mere booming, but the echo of an unwavering will. While the fighting had subsided, it didn't mean silence. Sultan Mehmed used the time to build a pontoon bridge across the Golden Horn, connecting the land and sea forces. It was a clever, clear, and strategic move. This strengthened the supply chain, communication, and direction of attack, becoming more solid, as if one large body were embracing the city from all sides. Conversely, inside the city, conditions were worsening. Food supplies had been dwindling since the Golden Horn fell to the Ottomans. Supplies were cut off. Hope was being eroded by hunger and anxiety. In this chaos, Giustiniani, the loyal Genoese commander, made a suggestion to Emperor Constantine. He suggested that the emperor travel to the Peloponnese, gather new forces, then launch a counterattack from there. He even offered his ships for use. However, the emperor refused. In a low but firm voice, he said that he would stay. He would defend this city to the last drop of blood. Then the heavens spoke. On May 25th, heavy rain poured down like a curtain of water from an angry sky. Accompanied by thunderous claps of lightning, the rain fell relentlessly. Several areas within the city were flooded, and the people began to murmur. Was this a sign? A sign from the heavens that the end was near? The next day, news of the escape spread. Some Venetian sailors quietly left the city, and the wealthy nobles, they followed too. They realized that if they wanted to live, this was their last chance. Seeing this, Emperor Constantine acted quickly. He ordered all the city gates closed. Not a single soul was allowed to leave. Whoever you are, he thought, you must share the burden of defending this city. Then the day came, Sunday, May 27th. The cannons roared again, but this time it wasn't just any attack. Their focus was on a weak spot in the wall, in an area called the cuss. The wall there sagged slightly, like a bent neck, ready to receive a blow. And sure enough, several large cavities formed. Crack after crack could no longer be repaired. The dwindling defense forces were unable to patch them back up. The sky was silent. The ground was still, but everyone knew. The final seconds were ticking. And night fell, as if to hide the last breath of the city that had once been the heart of the world. With the sun fading, the people of Constantinople, men, women, old and young, thronged to the churches, especially the Hagia Sophia. What had once been empty due to the boycott was now a sea of tears and prayers floating in silence. A farewell to the world they knew. Emperor Constantine himself was present there at a silent service which seemed to be the last service of his life. The next day, Monday, there was no sound of cannon fire, no arrows, no shelling, but that was a sign that the storm was drawing back to strike in its most devastating form the following day. Sultan Mehmed focused the entire day on preparing for the final assault, which he had set for Tuesday, May 29th. He ordered all Muslim soldiers to fast voluntarily, establish Qiyamul Layl, and increase their prayers and draw closer to Allah. He knew that true victory was not just a matter of strategy, but also of faith and destiny. He reviewed all preparations. He marked key points along the land wall, focusing primarily on the Lycus Valley, where the wall had been weakened and exposed. Meanwhile, the ships in the Golden Horn and the Sea of Marmara had taken up their positions. From the sky to the sea, everything stood ready in tense silence, like a fully drawn bow, just waiting to be released. Then, the early morning of May 29th, 1453. Sultan Mehmed stood. The remaining cannons were ready. 9 large gaping holes now gaped in the outer walls around the Lycus Valley, the result of 47 days of relentless siege. No less than 5,000 cannon shots had been fired, and 25 tons of gunpowder had been burned for one purpose: to open the gates to destiny. At approximately 1:30 in the morning, everything exploded in flames. Ottoman cannons thundered in unison from land and sea. Then, the wave of people arrived. The Ottoman ground forces carried long ladders, attempting to scale the walls, while the defenders waited with hot oil and arrows ready to burn. As soon as the first piece of wood touched the wall, everything erupted into brutal close-quarters combat. Giustiniani's Genoese troops held their ground tenaciously, beating back every incoming climber, every hand that attempted to seize victory. The battle lasted until dawn, and the first Ottoman wave was repulsed. But it wasn't over yet. On the seaward side, the Ottoman ships in the Marmara couldn't get close because the current was too strong. Meanwhile, at the Golden Horn, Soldiers disembarked and tried to scale the walls from the other side, but they too failed. And when they retreated for a moment, the cannons fired again. Stone shells slammed into the crumbling walls, and before the sun rose from the eastern horizon, a large hole finally opened. That was when Sultan Mehmed gave his final command. The cry of takbir echoed, the spirit of jihad burned, and from that hole, the Ottoman army charged. The wave grew stronger as a cavalry knight named Ulubatlı Hasan bravely scaled the wall and planted the Ottoman flag at its peak. His body was riddled with 27 arrows, but he remained standing like the banner of faith itself. Then he was martyred. The action galvanized the troops, but it made the enemy's defense even more precarious. Giustiniani, the defender of the wall, was mortally wounded. An arrow pierced his leg, a crossbow bolt pierced his chest, and a sword grazed his back. In his dying state, he was supported by 2 of his soldiers and asked Emperor Constantine for permission to return to his ship. He vowed to return after he recovered. However, the emperor knew opening the back gate was risky. People could panic, people could flee, but compassion was stronger than logic. And indeed, some soldiers who saw Giustiniani leave also fled. They were afraid. They had lost hope, and the flow of fleeing continued to grow, creating utter chaos. Emperor Constantine saw it and tried to hold them back. With his personal guard, he ran to the battlefield. He wanted to seal the gap with courage. However, it was too late. In just 15 minutes, 30,000 Ottoman troops had entered through the gap. And from that very gap, the voice came. It grew fainter, then louder, and finally echoed throughout the city. Constantinople has fallen. Among the corpses, they never found the emperor's body, but historians believe that he died alongside his people, perhaps in ordinary soldier's clothes, so no one recognized him. On the other hand, the Ottoman hero, Ulubatlı Hasan, died after his flag was raised, and the Genoese commander, Giustiniani, breathed his last 3 days later, on June 1st, 1453, in the Genoese city of Chios. His body was carried home by his surviving soldiers. And on that day, the 1,058-year journey of the Byzantine Empire ended. An era had collapsed, and a new one begins to emerge from the ruins of old dreams. And so it was. A magnificent story, begun over 1,000 years earlier, had come to an end. That morning, amidst the fog of ruins and the echoing of the takbir, an old world closed, and a new one began to open. Constantinople, once built by Caesar in the hope of rivaling Rome, had changed hands, but the memory of it, of its walls, of those who resisted, of those who invaded, would never truly fade. Because history doesn't belong to the victors alone. It belongs to those who listen, to those who remember and delve back into time that has stood still. And if stories like these calm your heart, make your soul reflect, and take you down the corridors of time long since abandoned, then don't hesitate to hit the like button, subscribe, and activate the notification bell so you never miss a beat of history that we gently whisper here. Until we meet again in another story from a distant time, yet it feels so close. See you in the next story.